It has been a busy and eventful offseason for the Winnipeg Jets, and there's a lot of uncertainty ahead. Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets joins us to discuss the future of the team and where they're headed next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. You can hear us now on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. It is great to bring back to the show the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. And Harrison, can't say it's been dull for Jets fans this offseason, but has it been good?
Yeah, I suppose some will look at this offseason and say, well, they're talking about trading some of their star players. That's never a good sign. But I think for the Jets, the Dubois trade kind of kicked things off. It actually has aged really well. I thought it was a great trade at the time. And Hellebuyck and Scheifele might be sticking around for a little bit longer than initially expected. I think training camp really brought some positive vibes. The prospects and kids that the Jets have, a lot of them are really exciting, and they've got a great way with the fans. I know the Jets were kind of pushing the angle a little bit, a lot of the connection to the fan base, but you see the way that some of the prospects really interact with the fans, especially a lot of the kids and folks who really came out to the practice rink to see him. And it's genuine. There's like a natural warmth to them. And you can tell kind of the direction the Jets are pushing. It feels like it's positive. I think there's a lot that has to happen, but I think the vibes are better than you'd expect for a team that's talking about trading Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck.
Yeah, no, that's encouraging, because last time we spoke, you sort of left that sort of up in the air as to the vibe between the players and the fans and the organization. Talk to me about Scheifele and Hellebuyck. What are the plans and where do we stand right now? Because a lot of teams around the league would love to add those two players to their roster.
Yeah, I think everyone would love to add them, and everyone is a cheapskate from the sounds of it. So no one wants to pay for rentals, and, it's a pretty fair situation, right? You're talking about a one-season thing. You don't want to necessarily commit a lot of free agency money afterwards, and I think that's a fair assessment. But, for the Jets, I think they're doing the calculus on this and wondering, if you keep them for up until the trade deadline and you're still in a playoff spot, is the stuff that you're going to get back in a trade really worth more than the playoff revenue, the chance to go on a run? And I personally, I don't love it because asset management is always really key, and you can probably still get something pretty decent by the trade deadline. But I also wouldn't be shocked if the Jets kind of look at everything and say, well, you know what, the trade offers, you're talking about a couple of lotto picks. It's always punching a card and hoping something out of a mid to late first turns into an NHLer, and is it really worth that over a chance to try and actually maybe even compete for a cup run? So it's weird. I think this is a scenario I wasn't really game planning. I feel like the DeBrincat trade kind of said, teams are not paying a lot for star talent, and it's funny because DeBrincat wasn't even in the same situation where Scheifele is. He's got some time left. I think he had some rights control, but it's weird. I feel like we're kind of in limbo, but now that the Bruins have seen Bergeron retire, that might be where you start to see some trade winds start to move if Scheifele goes to Boston.
And what do you think the Jets would want in return if they were to deal Scheifele?
This actually got a really funny response on one of my last videos, because I said Swayman plus would probably make sense. And one of the Bruins fans is like, "Yeah, there's no way you're trading a young, up-and-coming top goalie for Scheifele." And I was like, well, you might be surprised. Goalies aren't worth as much as you think.
Right.
And, for me, I have a really hard time imagining what the Bruins can actually offer the Jets, because they just don't have that much. I mean, they've mortgaged so much of their future on the present, which, makes a lot of sense given where they are. I guess like a Frederick plus Swayman kind of situation is what you'd probably be looking at. But then you also have to have the Hellebuyck trade lined up, because you're not going to go into the season with Helly, Swayman, and Bressois all fighting for like 2 spots. So I would imagine it would be like a chain reaction. You'd have Helly to New Jersey or something afterwards. But yeah, I mean, it's just it feels kind of unlikely in some areas, and yet the fit seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, you talked about the Jets' goal of competing for a playoff spot this year. How realistic is it, especially if Scheifele and Hellebuyck are on the roster at least till the trade deadline?
Oh, I think it's pretty likely. This team, I think, is going to be stronger than it was last year. There's more forward depth. There's more scoring depth. And it was funny. Like I said, I kind of took issue with the top 10 Locked On Network trade or like off-season acquisitions and stuff, because like Velarde, I think a lot of people are sleeping on him. I don't know if it's because he was with the Kings or his injury history, but that dude is immensely skilled. And honestly, I think going from Dubois to him isn't as much of a step down as people think it is. It might actually be more of a lateral move. But then Kupari comes in, Iafallo comes in, and immediately those guys are improvements on some of the depth players the Jets had last year. So provided, I mean, it's all kind of dependent on not having like critical injuries, but I feel like on paper, on the face of it at least, things are looking pretty good if you want to make the playoffs.
And then obviously you would hope Hellebuyck gets hot at the right time and you can go on that run. Tell me some of the young players who might be able to make an impact this year on the Jets.
So the one that I've kind of circled, he's not really a name that I think a lot of people are expecting, just because he's not, I mean, he doesn't have like the sexy game that I think everyone is like, oh gosh, here comes Nikolai Ehlers gliding around. Everyone knows Ehlers is amazing. Connor's got that great release. But the player that really caught my eye last year was Morgan Barron. Barron has this really quality forechecking ability, but he was always in the right areas, especially down low, to create some really dangerous chances. For some reason, the puck just refused to go in the back of the net for him. So, like, that's kind of where there's like a critical jump between being a good playmaker and maybe somebody who can actually help a little more on the score sheet. I think if he really finds that finishing touch this year, that could be a big change. And then I think an increased role on the back end for Dylan Sandberg would be really beneficial. Dylan is one of our best out-and-out defenders, and, he's not half bad in possession of the puck. So if he can continue to earn the trust of the coaching staff, I think those guys could play a really big role for this team going forward.
All right, so a little more optimism in Winnipeg than a lot of people might have thought. And I know there's some really talented players who are 2 or 3 years away as well. So some reasons to hope for the Winnipeg Jets, and that's encouraging, because I know last time we spoke, you were a little less optimistic. Harrison, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Folks, you can find me at LO_Winnipeg Jets and at HL Living Loco, both on Twitter, or I guess Z or whatever they want to call it nowadays. But of course, we are there, and we've got the podcast, Locked On Winnipeg Jets, every day.
All right, Harrison, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate you having me on.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. And no matter what baseball team you root for, you'll find plenty of opportunities to bet, great odds, parlays, all different kinds of bets on FanDuel. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.